But first and foremost, I'd like to welcome our first guest for today, Kavork Almassian, who is from the YouTube channel at Syrian Analysis. And so, what better expert, what better person to get on the show today to talk us through the craziness that seems to be going on in Syria? Kavork, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity. And I totally agree with you that there are very few actually mainstream and even alternative media outlets reporting about the persecution of the Christians in Syria. And I believe that many people belonging in different, let's say, religions and sects, they are persecuted, but we have lots of reporting about them, but somehow the persecution of the Christians are just not on our TV outlets or in the newspapers.
People don't want to know. So this channel, this show that you're on now, used to be on a mainstream television channel when I was back in the UK, and it was impossible to cover Syria. Nobody wanted to talk about southern Syria or northern Nigeria or Artsakh. Wherever Christians are persecuted, the mainstream media just simply does not care. If it's Mohammedans that
Yes.
are being persecuted, absolutely, let's talk about that all day. Or if it's the Jews, let's talk about that all day. But Christians, no interest. And so
Yes.
that's the point of this show. And I know you do a lot of that on your channel as well. But let's talk about the Christians in Syria, because I understand that about 10 years ago, they made up 10% of the population. As of today, it's more like two.
Mhm. Actually, I was born and raised in Aleppo in an Armenian Christian Orthodox family. And I remember very well because I left city of Aleppo when I was 18 years old and I went to Damascus to study. So I went to a secondary, elementary, and also kindergarten were all Christian. And my mother is a practicing Orthodox Christian, and she used to go regularly to the church, and we never felt like we were persecuted or there was a prejudice against us. In the contrary, we had our freedoms to practice our rituals. Basically, the Easter and the Christmas and everything was Christians. I'm not saying they used to have privileges. In the contrary, they were only treated fairly, let's say. However, later they decided that the regime, what they used to call the regime in Syria, shouldn't stay any longer because for geopolitical reasons. So we all understand that the decision makers, whether they are in the US or among the NATO countries or any country which decided to oust the former government of Syria, they have not considered at all the future of the Christians or other minorities in the country, because at the end of the day, what really matters is money
Mm.
and geopolitics and also the security of Israel in the region. Now, when we see the experience of Iraq and how the vast majority of the Christians left the country after the regime changed because of the ongoing hostilities and also the persecution of the Christians by some of the radical groups there,
Mm.
they all ended up as refugees in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere. And we haven't addressed that case yet, but because people have forgotten about it. After 30 years, who asks questions about the Iraq war? So this is the same issue happening in Syria, and I think that we are speaking about it right now, but 10 years from now, there will be other issues that people are hyper-focused on. Everybody will forget about Syria, about the Syrian people, and about the Christians of Syria, because they will be already scattered all around the world, and probably they would vanish from Syria. And for people to put it in a proper context, the Levant is the place where the Jesus Christ was born, and this is where the Christianity started. Many people do not know the gravity of the issue. If you ethnically cleanse the Christians from the birthplace of Jesus Christ, basically, and what kind of reflections this could have on the rest of the world. But you know better than myself that there is a war against Christianity, and I can see it also here in Germany, for example. The churches are Some of the churches are deviating from the teachings of Christianity. Basically, I have in
It's the
no
home of
way,
heresy.
yeah, I have in no way or shape any problem with anyone and his gender or sexual orientation. But in my opinion, when I see the priest carrying the LGBT flag and walking in a church, I find it a little bit ridiculous. So this is it, in the process of destroying people's identities, their spiritual identity, their faith. basically, because once you have a faith and once you have an identity, you will defend your inner self, you will defend your religion, you will defend your faith, you will defend your country if you have a belonging. But if you destroy the identity, if you destroy the civilization, then you have nothing else left to defend in your country. And this is what they're trying to do, basically, to kill the soul of the people all around the world.
Kill the collective soul by killing the soul of the individual. Absolutely. This is a spiritual war, of course it is. And I think you're right to point out that the worldly aspects of this, in that many of our leaders don't have faith. So it's all about GDP, it's all about economics, and it's all about interfering in foreign affairs to make profit. So,
Yes.
so do you believe that the reason that the demographic of Christians has pretty much died out or is dying out in Syria is because of neocons? It is because of the West interfering in that region.
Actually, the reason why the Christians left en masse Syria is because of the regime change war, which started in 2011.
Right.
And one of the people, I mean, I just want to give a few examples. For example, my father's shops were all destroyed by these so-called rebels, right? They detonated them. So this is a 30-year-old business. And my father, let's say, is over 60 years old. How can this man rebuild his businesses again? So he chooses to leave, right? And then he has sons, the sons take care of him. And this example, you can copy it to thousands, probably tens of thousands of people who lost their businesses. Then you have people, they lost their properties, like they don't have a home any longer. So what can they do? The other reason, also, one of the reasons is these NGOs, the liberal NGOs. What they did basically, in parallel of the regime change war, the people were devastated. There are security threats. They have lost their properties. They have lost their businesses. So they fled to the neighboring countries. And one of the neighboring countries where most Christians fled is Lebanon. And in Lebanon, they have set up lots of NGOs. Basically, you can go there. You can just submit your papers that you left your country and you're a Christian. They ask for your baptism, for example, document. And then they evacuate you in a matter of few months to Australia, to Canada, to the United States, to Europe, in different places, basically uprooting the people from their places into different places. And once you go to Europe or to the States or to Canada, and you start a new life, like you start your education or you start a new business, etc. After a few years, even if the war is over, you're not going to go back to your own country. That's the reality of the matter. So I used to have over 100 family members in Syria, in Aleppo. The number of the family relatives that I have now in Syria are two. They used to be zero. Now two people decided to go back.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you copy this on the larger scheme of affairs in Syria, you realize that many people decided, okay, I go to a different place and I restart a life. The Armenians left to Armenia, for example. We had 120,000 ethnic Armenians. The Armenian government said, okay, I give you an Armenian passport if you come back to your roots, to Armenia. However, I would argue and say that the presence of the Christians, the Armenians in Syria is of utmost importance because our presence there was due to, for example, the genocide, which happened against the Armenians 100 years ago. So my grandparents fled to Syria, and we have churches there, we have schools, we have a community. So we preserved our language, we speak Armenian language fluently in Aleppo because we studied Armenian there. So once you eliminate this, you're also eliminating all the cultural and civilizational traces and historical traces of the Armenians and the Christians there. That's why I was all the time against this forced displacement of the Christians. However, after the regime change, I advised the people who asked me what to do to leave, because I know that it is ridiculous to believe that somehow someone like Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who was in Iraq sending car bombs against the Shia neighborhoods, who who vowed allegiance to Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was the partner of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of ISIS, and he was himself ISIS. I refuse to believe that this guy is a reformed guy. I don't believe in the mainstream press.
Yeah.
So when he took power, I told my friends and my relatives, if you have the means to leave, leave. because the future is going to be very, very grim. Now, some people said, no, this is scaremongering. This guy is a reformed, he's a rebel, and he will treat everybody fairly.
Yeah.
And I told them, this is just the first few weeks. Wait until he imposes his rule over the population. And once that happens, he will come after the religious and ethnic minorities. And in the mind, the ideology that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani believes is the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah, who was 800 years ago, made a new interpretation of the Islamic teachings. And this is one of the most radical interpretations that you could ever hear. So what they basically do, according to these teachings, they have to purify the domestic home of Islam, which means every non-ultra Orthodox Muslim Sunni first should be targeted. That's why they came after the Alawites first, and they killed them en masse, over 10,000 of them, they slaughtered them in Syria. And then they came after the Druze, which is another Islamic minority sect. And then they tried to come after the Kurds. So once they were finished with the alleged purification of their domestic home, now they would focus on the Christians and on the Jews. This is the teachings, like it's like A, B, C, D. You can read it all in the scripture and in the text. Therefore, I always said that the Christians will be targeted sooner or later. And now we have attacks against the Christians, not only against the San Elias church in Damascus. In these 48 hours, 3 churches were targeted, one of which was 2 suicide bombers. One of them was Pakistani and the other one was Syrian. And the Syrian was a member of the General Security of Jolani, so he's part of the government who carried out this attack. And then they opened fire and killed the guard of a church in Latakia, in the coastal city of Latakia. And afterwards, they attacked a church in Aleppo, and thankfully nobody was killed there. So this is, in my opinion, a planned attacks against the Christian community there so that they forced them to leave the country.
Right.
Now, what did Jolani do? This is very important that we need to understand the culture and the language, the Arabic language and the culture in Syria. So if somebody is praying in a church or in a mosque and he gets killed in Syria and in our culture, this person is a martyr. He was during the prayer when you're trying to come closer to God,
Yeah.
and if you're targeted, you become a martyr. Now, when over 30 Christians were slaughtered by these terrorists in Damascus, Jolani made a statement, and he said basically he's expressing solidarity with the victims of a criminal explosion. Now, this is first of all not a criminal explosion. This is a terrorist attack against a church. And he cannot use the term terrorist attack because he himself did the same thing hundreds of times in Iraq. So if he calls this attack a terrorist attack, then he would be called himself a terrorist, right? Because he did the same thing in the past. And the second thing is he didn't call for 3 days of mourning, because if such an attack happens, the country all bring the flags down, and for 3 days the people do not go to work, and they declare 3 days of mourning. And he didn't do that. The only thing he did, he called the archbishop, the patriarch, sorry, and he said, "Oh, he feels so sorry that this happened." But you saw the video of the patriarch. In one of the videos, he tells him this was not enough, and we're holding the government responsibility for the attack which happened against us.
We'll get to that in a moment, but I think you're right in that. Well, I mean, a lot of this is about the displacement of Christians, absolutely. But of course, in your lineage, it began in Armenia, and the genocide in Armenia isn't even recognized internationally. And so, how can we address these issues if people still deny that it even happened in the past and when it's happening right now before our very eyes? Let's have a look at this post from Ahmed SSH about the attack in Damascus. So a church in Damascus was bombed, 15 Christians dead, no outrage, no protests, no hashtags. This is the third terrorist attack in Syria in 4 weeks, and still silence. But this wasn't just an attack on people, this was an attack on coexistence itself. And if we scroll down, we'll see the image. But I think you're right in that. So the Quran is a guidebook for conquering, for taking over, for dominion. It's not about, there's no coexistence in Islam. But what we see here is on the left, if we click that image, thank you. So we see the icons in the church splattered with blood. This is literally now the blood of the martyrs. These icons are relics. And so what I don't think the Mohammedans realize is that this only makes Christians stronger, actually, because these people are now in heaven. As you point out, if you're killed while you're praying, you are martyred. You're a red martyr, and that's what's happening. And if we go to the second tweet, the next tweet, we see some of the names you were mentioning about who was this, who was responsible for this awful. Because when I think Damascus, I think Saul becoming St. Paul. I think of the conversion. I think of
Mhm.
miraculous Christian theology, and now we search Damascus in our search engines or AI, and what do we find? We find terrorist attacks. But latest developments: member of Syrian Ministry of Defense involved in suicide bomb attack at Mar Elias Church in Al Duwalahi. So, is this the person you were speaking on?
Yes, he's part of the general security of Jolani. So he is registered security personnel in the Jolani regime. And these two persons basically, they had a habit of going to Christian neighborhoods, sitting in a pickup truck. And in the pickup truck, they had big loudspeakers, basically calling the Christians to convert to Islam.
Right.
And after many weeks of trying to persuade the Christians, and in one incident, they were beaten up by several Christians in one of the neighbors. So they fled the neighborhood. And next time they came with a suicide vest. And they carried out this attack. So the Christians of Syria are now very few. They don't have guns, they don't have weapons, they don't have any political party representing them, they don't have a government behind them, they have no one. So fighting back under such circumstances, in my opinion, is suicidal. You cannot really fight against a 40,000 militia, basically. Basically, 30% of them are multinational, coming from all around the world. This doesn't make any sense for me to fight against them under such circumstances. What needs to be done is to have a government, a regime, which controls this type of, or puts them under control, these radicals. Now, Syria, I lived in Syria for a very long time, and at no time I felt discriminated, also by ordinary Muslims. All the time I used to hear from them that you guys, the Armenians, are the honest people, and you guys, we want to buy from you because you don't cheat, you don't lie. And if you tell me this is made in China, means this is made in China. When you say this is made in Germany, means made in Germany. You don't mix products. You don't try to betray us, all this stuff. Now, unfortunately, after the war started in Syria, there were many TV outlets and many clerics and many sheikhs and imams. They spend millions and millions and millions to radicalize the people and tell them the Christians are your enemies and you have to fight them. They are infidels. They are this and that. So these attacks started only after the regime change war started in Syria. But we always had what they used to call the Assad regime. And the Assad regime, what is the Assad regime? The Syrian army was basically every man in Syria serves in the military. So from every family, every home, you have someone fighting in the military. It's not like it was Assad's militia and his cousins were fighting in the military, right? So they used to protect the people, regardless of their ethnicity and religion. And despite all the downsides of the former Assad government, it was a political authoritarianism, but it has proven to be the least, I would say, it was a regime which protected people's personal freedoms and your right to worship and your right to belong to any culture and religion and language, basically. Yes, we didn't have political freedoms. How many people would have participated in the political life, in the parliament or in the ministry, right? Those are all limited. At the end of the day, what do the families look for? Safety, to send your kids to school, which was free for everyone, from the kindergarten to university to master degree to PhD, all for free. The fuel was supported by the government, the electricity was supported by the government, so people had a very, in my opinion, comfortable lives. So under such circumstances, destroying everything for the sake of political freedoms or democracy, for me, it made no sense. That's why I stood against this so-called revolution, especially that I knew that the nature of the people who want to topple Assad
Mm.
are not democratic. They are the people of Jolani, they are the people of Baghdadi. How can I join this type of movement against a regime they call a dictatorship?
Well, this was
So
predicted, wasn't it? People were predicting that if Assad falls, then civil liberties or freedom of worship also falls, and Christians will be persecuted under the incoming regime.
Thank you for watching my Common Sense Crusade. If you'd like to watch the whole show, you can subscribe to lotuseaters.com for as little as £5 per month, and then you get access to a bank of content as well. My show is 3 p.m. every Thursday. See you there. Deus Vult.